fictional book whose name totally went out of my mind at this moment, but I'm sure you can find it if you go online. Anyhow, it's a novel which is a barely fictionalized account of some of his experiences in the world of academia. And he has a very intriguing hypothesis about cattle mutilations. And basically, he believes that he in the book, and he doesn't necessarily really believe this, but I think it's a very interesting hypothesis, that the aliens are using cattle to terraform the earth. Now, what do I mean by that? What's terraforming? It means to change the face of a planet. Now, how would you do that? Well, here's the thing. In the book, he hypothesizes, and again, this is just fiction, that these aliens breathe an atmosphere that is richer in methane than we do. Now, I'm sure some of you, if you've lived on a farm, if you've been around farmers, you know that cows burp a lot, and they suffer from very bad flatulence. And it has often been said that if one can find a way to do it, like put a glass dome over a herd of cows, you can collect enough methane to run your farm, to eat your farm. Well, anyhow, his hypothesis is that the aliens are experimenting on our cattle, because think how many millions of head of cattle are on the world, and just tweaking their DNA to make them slightly more gaseous. Because people don't realize how wonderfully and perfectly designed this planet is. If there is even 1% more methane in this atmosphere, most life on it would be dead. Just like that. And then the aliens could move in and have a perfectly acceptable planet. So his little idea that he floats in this book is that, and he's not saying he believes this, is that that they're just tweaking the DNA of the cattle enough to make them burp and pass gas more. And that would end up gradually, over a period of 20 or 30 years, killing everyone on Earth. And they could take it over without firing a shot. A kind of bizarre form of biological warfare. I think the guy has a great sense of humor, frankly. Anyhow, he's a really good brother in the Lord. I recommend his work very highly. So what's the reptilian agenda? And I have to tell you, this is not a real reptilian. This is a thing from Jurassic Park. But some people who have seen these aliens, and I would agree, say they look just like velociraptors in the movie Jurassic Park. And they act about the same way. So these once divine beings now resemble their new father, the devil. And they seek to mingle the DNA of fallen angels with humanity. And as a result of this, Satan hopes to corrupt humanity even as he did before the flood. And this is very important to understand, because if they can corrupt us to the point that we, not we in this room, but we as a race, are so full of fallen DNA, angel DNA, that we can no longer accept Christ. We can no longer make a decision for Christ because our wills have been so corrupted by this sort of thing. You're talking about a very dangerous situation here for humanity. They want to mingle fallen angel DNA with our DNA. And they do this by seducing women. Because, again, they can assume very attractive human form. In fact, one of the, it's funny, I get all these strange emails from people. I don't know if you've heard of this David Icke. But he's this guy who totally hates, the gospel, the master, everything. But he's big on this reptilian thing. He's like totally dedicated to the reptilian thing. And he claims that the royal family are all reptilians. He claims that Prince Charles is a reptilian. And I said, frankly, I think that they could do better than that in terms of shape-shifting than Prince Charles. But anyhow, that's a side note. Some of what the guy says is true. It is interesting that down through the centuries, dragons have been repeatedly used as a symbol of power. For example, we were there when we were over in London doing ministry. If you drive into the city of London. You know what the City of London is? It's not the City of London. It's what we call like Wall Street. They call it the City. And it's like this interior little enclave within London where all the financial bigwigs are, all the big bankers, all of the movers and shakers, just like we have Wall Street. Well, anyhow, right at the entrance to the City of London are two giant black sculptures of reared-up dragons. Isn't that interesting? And, of course, some of you may know the symbol of the Kingdom of Wales is a dragon. And, of course, the famous King Arthur, you know what his last name was? Pendragon, which means son of the dragon. And, of course, there's also Dracula, whose name means son of the dragon in Romanian. It's funny how often you see these dragons being used for stuff like this. But they can also assume human form and seduce women. Or they can even, there's some women want to come to them and have sex with them even as lizards, which to me is, you know, way beyond kinky, but we won't even go there. The other thing they do is they abduct and or rape women, either the typical UFO abduction or else satanic ritual contexts, as many people have seen these lizard-type beings in satanic rituals and assumed, probably rightly, that they were fallen angels. Excuse me. The other thing they're going to do, and I know this was discussed when I was involved with all this wicked stuff 20, 30 years ago, they want to get fallen angel DNA into the blood supply through certain vaccines. And we all know there's already a lot of nasty stuff in those vaccines. But black magic and black science may have generated the HIV strain. See, back in the late 70s, when I was involved with some very wicked people, they were doing high-level occult magic to produce something very like the AIDS virus. I don't know if they're responsible for it, but you see, when you put black, and I don't know if you know what I mean by black science. I'm not meaning African-American scientists. Black science is undercover science. It's science that is kept from the common people. You know, like if you see something on TV, oh, we have this new gee-whiz microchip that runs at, like 2 teraflops and blah, blah, blah. Well, you can bet that they've had it for like 20 years. You can assume that anything that they're letting us have, they've already had for 20 years, and we're getting the sloppy seconds. So there's all kind, like just as an example of this, my wife Sharon used to work at the university years ago, in fact, 70s, University of Wisconsin Medical School in a top secret area. And they were cloning bodies and body parts back then at the University of Wisconsin. And that was like in 1975. That's 30 years ago. And now, we're almost ready to clone a person. We don't really want to do that because it might be illegal or immoral. They've been doing it for years. They've honestly been doing it for years. And the kind of occult stuff that was being done involved actually reaching into DNA and twisting and transforming the DNA. And I think this is one possible scenario for the mark of the beast, because these people have plagues in the wings, which makes Ebola look like, a case of the measles. And what I think might very well happen is they're going to somewhere down the road introduce a just incredibly scary plague on the earth. Something where you're, bleeding from every pore and, horrible stuff happening. And then they say, oh, but guess what? We found the vaccine. But the only catch is you have to bow the knee and worship our great world leader who gave us this vaccine. And then you'll get your shot in the arm and you'll be safe from this horrible disease. And when they give you that shot in the arm, they will give you what scientists call the luciferin gene. That's actually what they call it, the luciferin gene. It's a gene in our genome that glows green under an electron microscope. And some preachers believe, who have studied this, not scientists, but preachers, and again, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a mere preacher, that this is what came into Adam when he fell. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to promulgate even more of this. that this is like the death watch beetle that's inside of every human being, this Luciferian gene. And once you get this in your system, you're lost. You'll never, I mean, if you're, and if you are a Christian, I don't know what it would do to you. But if you're not a Christian, forget it. Because you realize the human body, the human genome, has tons of what they call junk DNA. Now, what does that mean? It's DNA that either seems to not have any purpose, or else we haven't figured out what it is yet. A significant part of the human genome is this junk DNA. And what the plan is to have these Luciferian genes take over all of that junk DNA. So instead of there just being one, there might be hundreds. And what's going to happen then? You see, I personally, this is my only belief, and I can't support this except just it makes sense, that before Adam fell, there was no junk DNA. Everything he had was working on all cylinders. Because, Yahweh don't make junk. But when he fell, then a lot of his abilities went away. His mind became darkened and clouded by sin. The death entered the world. And what do you think the impact of this is going to be if all this fallen DNA is mingled in massive quantities with people? So, when you consider the nasty stuff that is already in vaccines, if you've heard my medical conspiracy video, I kind of get on the tub and thump against vaccines, but I believe they're extremely dangerous and that they're being used to introduce all sorts of nasty stuff into the general population. But this, to me, is a very possible thing because it's more subtle. I mean, everybody and their brother nowadays knows about mark of the beast. Yeah, you get this tattoo on your arm, you get this tattoo on your forehead. Everybody who saw it, remember those movies that came out in the 60s? I saw them after I was saved years later, but, I forget what they were called, The Thief in the Night, and there was like 3 or 4, and they're kind of cheesy looking today because they look kind of dated and everything, but, they were a good effort at the time, and, but everybody knows about that. A lot of people aren't going to fall for that, or else they won't care. This is scary enough and subtle enough they might very well care. Magical seduction. By now, hundreds or perhaps thousands of women have been impregnated by the B'nai Elohim. And I've met a few of their offspring over the years. We've ministered to a few of them. And guess what? They can be saved just like everybody else. They can be set free just like everybody else. Just because they had bad parentage. That doesn't matter. Because as long as they have human DNA, as long as they have human free will, they can still come to the cross just like everybody else. Met this one young lady. She had already been set free, but she was the product of a fallen angel union with a high-level witch, Satanist. And the only way you could tell her is anything a little bit different about her. She was very pallid, very pale, very black hair, which isn't that uncommon. But if she took off her dark glasses, have you ever looked into the eyes of a goat? They have kidney bean-shaped pupils. And that's what her eyes were golden. And she had no eyelashes, and her pupils were kidney-shaped, not round like normal human beings. So she was saving up her money at the time to get special contact lenses, but until then she just had to wear dark glasses whenever she went out in public. But she loved Yeshua with all of her heart, and she was so grateful that he had set her free from all of that. And we've had several young people like that. Most of them, in their late teens, early 20s. So don't lose heart. Even though some of this stuff seems pretty over the top and pretty scary stuff, hell hath no hurt that heaven cannot heal. Just remember that. Realize that our understanding of technology is very limited compared to the B'nai Elohim. These are beings of incredibly cold intellect, incredibly corrupt intellect, and they are utterly without mercy. Behind the scenes, both in science and technology, they and their human stooges have been hard at work introducing incredible technologies, things that are decades ahead of what we're allowed to hear about in the news. As part of our own magical training, we were taught how to turn on some of the genes in our body that were part of junk DNA. Now, I had no idea, that was, 20, 30 years ago, how that has impacted us. I've renounced all of that stuff. I've repented of all of it, but you never know. In my particular case, for example, oddly enough, my blood type changed. My RH factor, I used to be, I can never remember which is which, O negative, and now I'm O positive. It's one or the other. And that's supposed to be impossible. But yet, I gave blood once when I was in college, and I had one blood type, and I gave blood when I was in seminary after doing all of this weird stuff, and had a totally different blood type. So I think, yes, I've probably been tinkered with a little bit over the years, but I can't prove it. I don't have any memories of anything other than what I've already shared. There's been dark hints of this stuff in the past. Occultists and authors like Aleister Crowley and H.P. Lovecraft wrote of these mysteries more than 80 years ago. Crowley talked about this being that came to him. I'll talk about that in a minute. Let me talk about Lovecraft first. Lovecraft was a novelist who was a very strange individual. He never married. He lived with these two maiden aunts as kind of a recluse in Providence, Rhode Island, and he wrote these very weird stories. All of them are very disturbing. They're not like your typical horror novels, because they were written like 80 years ago when we were in a much more genteel society, but yet they give you the willies. And he talked about things like intermarriage between monsters and human beings, about, if you've ever read The Shadow over Innsmouth, which I don't recommend, it's about this small seaport town of Innsmouth, fictional, in Massachusetts, where there's a Masonic lodge where they worship Dagon, the god of the sea. And these strange, shambling, frog-like creatures come out of the sea and mate with human women, and they produce offspring. And there's other stories that he wrote of similar vein. And what's interesting is everybody thinks, oh, well, this is all fiction. Well, one of the things Lovecraft supposedly created was the great elder god, or the great old one, Cthulhu. Remember Cthulhu? He's the being we called out of Lake Michigan just 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. My time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? Hallelujah. Anyway, God, I can't believe it's been 30 years since we did that. Anyhow, so is this stuff real or not? Let me share something. I read a thesis that was written by a scholar out in the East Coast who made a study of Lovecraft's background, his ancestry. He discovered that Lovecraft's grandfather was an Egyptian Freemason. That's the same kind of high-level Freemasonry that I was in, the 90th degree Masonry thing. And yeah, believe it or not, I was a 90th degree Mason. That's another videotape. Anyway, and they think that maybe he had a trunk of these horrible forbidden books that Lovecraft talks about. And when he died, Lovecraft inherited those things. Because Lovecraft spent his life in terror. He would never go near the sea. He would never go underground, because he writes about these beings like Dagon and Cthulhu that are living under the sea. And then he writes about these beings that live under the earth, that crawl like giant worms that consume people and digest them very slowly, like Shub-Nigrath. Just creepy, creepy stuff. And then there's always the crawling chaos in Nyarlathotep. And then this is stuff that's 80 or 90 years old. And this guy is more powerful and more popular now than he ever was in his lifetime. And he was writing about all this stuff, and now it's happening. I mean, strange things are coming out of the sea and breeding with human beings, because some of these UFO beings, some of these UFOs come from under the sea. Don't forget what it talks about in the book of Job. It talks about dead souls under the sea. And it's not talking about just dead people. Because, a soul by definition can't be dead, because the soul is the nefesh, the life principle. Then we have good old Mr. Crowley. Oh, wait, forgot about that. We got to talk about Crowley. I forgot what the slide was. Crowley opened doorways into other dimensions. He had this being called Lam, who appeared, who just looks exactly like the gray aliens. And he continually was trying to bring back these old gods by tearing open these dimensional doorways. And it went into another generation. Disciples of Crowley helped usher in major developments in this. Any of you may have heard of Jack Parsons. He's one of the fathers of American rocketry. He was also a disciple of Aleister Crowley and the founder of JPL Laboratories. Wernher von Braun said that the American space program could not have existed without Jack Parsons. The other one in this little team was L. Ron Hubbard, who was a disciple of Aleister Crowley. And Hubbard, of course, went on to come up with Dianetics and found the religion of Scientology. The less said about that, the better. Anyhow, these guys got together and did what was called the Babylon working. And they used a red-headed woman as a medium, and they tried to rip open the dimensional doorway all the way. And they apparently succeeded in doing it because something awful came through. And within a couple of years, Jack Parsons blew himself up in a rocketry accident. His jet fuel exploded. And of course, L. Ron Hubbard got out of that whole thing and decided it was much more secure to start a fake religion and get rich off it. So, and it's going on into this generation as well. Here we see a comparison between this Lam, this is the being Crowley called up in 1918, and a classical gray alien that started showing up in the 1960s. Look how similar they look. As I said before, these were workings that were intended to open up doorways into other dimensions and permit dark gods to come in and resume their reign on Earth. See, in this cosmology, these beings believe that the good gods, like, the God of the Bible, they came and threw these people out and cast them into other dimensions where they're trapped. And so these nasty black magicians are trying to awaken them. And look what has happened in our world and in our society in the last generation, how much things have, I hate to say it, but gone to hell in a handbasket. And I think a lot of it is because of the magical workings that these people have done and the evil things that they've let into our society. Now, to bring this to a conclusion, that one of the things that really touched me when I was a young person, I was kind of into science fiction books. Got them at the public library, and one of the books I read was a book by Arthur C. Clarke, who is now the only living giant of the early golden age of science fiction left. There was this, they kind of called them the Blessed Trinity, so to speak, of Isaac Asimov, Robert Allen Heinlein, and Arthur C. Clarke. The other two have passed away, and Clarke is still alive, although he's quite old by now. Anyhow, he wrote this book in 1953, an incredibly provocative vision. And I need to share this with you because I think it'll help you understand what's happening here at the end of days. In this book, and the material in this book has been copied, you'll recognize some of the scenes that are also in Independence Day. Huge UFOs come to Earth. Giant UFOs are hovering over all the major cities. The Secretary General of the United Nations is contacted by these people who identify themselves as the overlords. And they say they are here to watch over us. And they will not let anybody see us until they've been here for 50 years. But the Secretary General is taken up every now and then to the ship to meet with them, and he looks at them through a one-way mirror, and he can't see them, but they can see him. And he meets with the overlord leader, who's called Carolyn. What happens is 50 years after their arrival, they appear in person. And guess what they look like? They happen to be gigantic, and red-skinned with horns and cloven hooves and a tail. These are the overlords. And they explain their purpose, that they have been here to watch us as we entered into our nuclear infancy, our development of an atomic bomb, of hydrogen bombs, of nuclear power and space travel, because this is the end of humanity's childhood. And they say that the children that are now being born on the earth will no longer be human. They will be superhuman. And that they're here to midwife this birth. And basically the story ends with children being born all over the world that are like prodigies. They're geniuses. They have awesome psychic abilities. And before you know it, the human race basically is ended. And this is where the famous line that Clark is often quoted as saying, he said, the earth is the cradle of mankind, but mankind can't live in a cradle forever. And so basically the earth is destroyed in a burst of light, and all these superhuman children fly off into the cosmos. And that's childhood's end. Now this incredibly evocative vision is, I believe, very prophetic. That the beings that are now being brought into the world through this genetic manipulation, through the black magic and black science I've been talking about, the Antichrist was born in 1966, according to Satanists. On June 6, 1966, 666, you know. And as he aged, and as he matured, they started targeting, beginning with my generation, the baby boom generation. Look what they did, drugs, alcohol, free sex, all of this bizarre stuff. They introduced the use of powerful hallucinogens that were originally developed by the CIA. People like Timothy Leary said that if you took enough LSD, your genes would mutate, and you would become what he called Homo noeticus, new man, and that you would become the next step in human evolution. Now, unfortunately, he was right. LSD does cause genetic mutation, but there's not really any such thing as a good mutation. They're almost always bad. People are born with birth defects. And, of course, Timothy Leary himself died of prostate cancer a couple of years ago. Now we have the new thing that's coming along, the supposed indigo children. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but they're called indigo children because in Hinduism, they have this system that's called chakras. These are energy centers that go up the body, and the highest level chakra, the color that it emanates is indigo, if you can see auras. And so these indigo children are children that are born prodigies. You may have seen some of them on television shows like 60 Minutes or Prime Time Live. Some of these children are 9 or 10 years old and are getting PhDs in advanced mathematics. Some of them are brilliant writers already. Some of them are brilliant musicians, and a lot of them have extraordinary psychic gifts. What's going on here? Is this childhood's end? Well, the New Age wants us to believe that they are the salvation of the world. But let me tell you something. In our ministry, we've run into a few of these indigo children that were born into Christian families. And remember, every good gift and every perfect gift comes from the Father of lights, James tells us. And even though these New Age people are deceiving themselves into thinking that this stuff is somehow theirs, that it's their mojo, it's their magic, whatever you want to call it. We dealt with some of these children in deliverance, and what we found is they're incredibly gifted, incredibly spiritually sensitive children that just need to have themselves be set free by the power of the Holy Spirit. And then, can these kids move in the area of the gifts of the Spirit, in the area of prophecy? I mean, we met one such child over in London. The case was so severe, the parents actually flew us over to London to help the child. An extraordinary young lady, 8 or 9 years old. And that child is going to do something for the Lord, let me tell you. And I am hopeful about this because I think, again, whatever Satan tries to do, Yahweh's like the master chess player, and he's 10 moves ahead. And I would just counsel you to really, those of you who are younger, who have young children, love them, pray for them, pay attention to them, because I think children nowadays are being born with some very special stressors and some very special gifts, because that's how it works down here, unfortunately. If you don't have challenges, you don't have gifts. And all I can tell you is I really believe that the new generation that's now coming up, that are now 9, 10, 12, 15 years old, are going to be extraordinary. And, I think we're going to need those children, because I think things are going to get pretty tough around here with all this stuff going on. And we need them, and we need them desperately. So those of you who have children, who are young enough to have children, take care of them. I mean, this is redundant to even say it. I hope you would. But if they seem to be a little bit unusual, pray for them, minister to them, be patient with them, because I think it's because they're going to blossom into a generation that the world has never seen. I think they're going to blossom into the generation that is going to see the second advent of the Messiah.